Welcome to Sex, Lies, and Blank Pages. We're here to discuss your questions.
And writing, like plots,
Yes.
characters. How we both actually just started this coming off of writing a scene. Both of us are like,
Yeah.
it was a very intense scene, I think, for both of us. So we thought it'd be a good time to, ask, answer your questions about how we get to plot, how characters develop, and that kind of,
Yeah.
interesting writing questions.
All that good stuff. And if you don't know, both of us are very experienced. I've been writing for almost 9 years and have over 60 books published. And Stacy,
I'm hitting on, oh God, this hurts. So like 11 years, it might be, and then my books are a little less because they're longer, but so I
much
have about
longer.
40.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have
Your
about 40.
books, aren't your books like 120,000 words?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They run around there.
Mine are around 55. So Stacy's
Oh
are
my God.
literally twice as long, more than twice as long as a
So
lot of
we
my
have
books.
equivalent
Yeah.
books. So
You're
yeah.
beating me. That would make you at 80 plus. So yeah, you're
Dang.
still beating me. Yeah.
So yeah, and it's a difficult question to ask because there's so many answers.
Mhm.
But I think we should just go through what we do.
Exactly what
So
works for us. I was just reading this book called Chill and Prosper, and it was like you don't have to be an expert. All you have to do is tell your story. So I'm happy to give what works for me and also to acknowledge that even if it works for me, it might not work for you, and that's okay because this is art. And it's important
yeah.
to keep it as art and keep your creative juices flowing. So, Colleen, go ahead, hit us with the questions and we'll just blab our way through it.
Sure.
Which we do
And I
well.
do want to
Yeah.
say that these are listener questions that we are covering today. So,
Mhm.
as always, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments anywhere and we'll work on answering them for you.
Also,
So, to
follow, subscribe, share it with your bestie, make us go viral. Love y'all. Okay, let's go.
little plug. Okay.
Shameless
So,
plug.
how do
Yeah.
you organize and keep track of all of your brainstorming, research, prep, how the characters and plot twists tie together, etc.?
Oh God. Oh, go ahead, Willow, because mine's just a
I
mess over here with that.
I don't. So I don't start writing until I'm ready to write it, even though I have 6 current whips, which would prove that I'm a liar. But for the other one, whips are works in progress,
Yeah.
WIP.
Not the
So
actual.
yeah, not like oh, whoosh.
We
I only have
we did
one
that
of
too.
those. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I go to sit down to write, I've typically had this story in my head for a long time. The one that I'm currently writing is an anomaly because only a few months ago, I was watching a TV show called The Program on Netflix, which was a documentary about a boarding school, similar to what Paris Hilton has described in her recent documentary. And I had to pause it, outlined right then and there, and my outlines are very rough. I do like a couple of sentences per chapter essentially and just break them up without numbering the chapters, then fill in gaps, and it's done in maybe an hour. This one was only 17 chapters. Typically they're like 20 to 30, and I didn't have time to write it, so I messaged my friend Amelia Wild, who I've co-written with, and I said, hey, I came up with something that's really fucked up. Do you want to write it with me? Because I don't have time, but I really want to write it.
Of
And she was
course.
like, oh, right.
Fucked
And
up? Check. Yeah.
that's what she
I'm on
said.
board.
She said, Wills, you had me at fucked up. And I sent her the outline. She added some juicy bits to it. We walked through a couple plot points. And now we're working through it and we're working on it only a few months later. But literally all I have is this one doc. That's it. I don't have separate sheets with notes or anything like that. One of my editors, she will send me a document that has like certain, like all of this detailed stuff that you would think, like character boards with things that they say
Oh,
or
the
unique
plotter.
ticks. Yeah, she like breaks it, like it's like she does the opposite. She like creates the plot and the character board from the story after it's written. I'm like, oh, that's really helpful for like my like a team like who like sends things to artists, and artists want to know what's the character description, or are there certain things that are relevant, things of that nature. Yeah, but I am a keep it in my head, in my noggin, and roll with it, even for long worlds like my Merciless world, where I have like 7 of the thick boys, which is equivalent to 24, I think, single books. that I've written in this world. But again, my team breaks it down and has like on organized author and in a Google Doc, everything broken down. So if they need to reference it or if I need to reference it later on, it's easy for me to find, but they take care of that after the fact rather than while I'm writing.
That's what I need to do. It's always the things of like, what color was that guy's eyes? That was like four books back. That's like was a sub character. You know, you're like, I have no idea.
I do parentheses. I'll literally parentheses his eye color and keep going. And I'm like, that's for the editor. That's not like,
Okay.
yeah, because I'm like, I'm not going to pause in my mojo to backtrack and figure something out. I'm like, that can be figured out later. If it's a relevant thing, then hopefully I remember it. But if it's just like some side character, it's probably not relevant whether they have like hazel eyes or ice blue eyes or dark eyes
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
So I'm a complete pantser like you. Most people seem to fall in the middle. There's people I know that are murder board kind of walls. You're like, and again, when we're all starting, we think like, oh, I'll follow that, that makes that maybe I'll be a better author that way, or I'll follow that. And I'm like, you kind of just have to try it all out when you're first starting. Then you find what works for you, because I realized I wasted my time when I did all that stuff. And it felt more forced, where the movie, like the way
I love that you
work
just said
is-
the movie because that's it. You
Yeah.
see it like a movie, right?
Yeah, it's a movie in my head. And I realized it took me a long time to realize when I got writer's block, it's because I couldn't see it in my head. It wasn't working out. So I was like, I was stuck, and I would have to go for walks and feel like, okay, what am I doing wrong?
What do you
So-
do? So when you get stuck, you go for a walk?
Nature seems to be my like get out of writing, like get out of my seat, because I'm the more I force it, the more I get angry, and then I almost like your brain locks down on me. Like I'm like, it's like, fuck you, I'm not gonna work for you, bitch. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Ah." So
I
when I get
skip
out
scenes.
I
So
see.
I will go out of order. I've written books backwards before,
Yeah,
also
you're
because
weird.
of that. I am
Even
weird.
Lexi
Yeah.
Ryan, like she's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, no, and she goes, it's like, I call it weaving. Like, I'll take a scene here and I'll weave it together. My first book, I did that. Like, again, I heard an author say that, and they're like, just go with the moment. And so I tried that, and I realized, again, the movie in my head, I need to know what they're feeling in the scene prior to get through them to the next scene. Like, it needs to be a full developed, because I realized, again, I was wasting my time. I'd get to the next scene and I'm like, either I was forcing it, because that's not at all what I want, would have been if I had just let them go naturally. So my first book, Darkness, is I did the spotting, and it just like, after a while I was like, no. And as much as I hate it, I will do like fill in here if it's an action scene, because that really, doesn't, change the next scene. But most of it I have to now, it's, has to
In
be scene
order.
by scene by scene. Yeah, in order, because I need to understand how they develop along and how they grow. Otherwise I'm jumping around, and I feel, but I think going back to like the way I process, again, I can pick up a scene like Savage Lands. A bit of it came from that movie Sense8, the TV show. Like, there's all these things that I'll grab and be like, ooh, that's interesting. Ooh, that's interesting. But you can't ever describe really what it is that makes that story finally develop in your head. It's actually, it just does. And and I think that's when you're an author, is because it won't let go, and you're just like, I got to get this out. And it then keeps, and I'll be like, okay, this is just gonna be 1 or 2 books, and 7 books later, and I write nothing down. People are shocked. I have no notes. Like, I'll have like at the beginning, you and I, especially the current work in progress I'm doing, I haven't like, because that one wasn't as natural. Like, I wanted to do this next, high fantasy. So I was a little bit more like, ooh, let's see what this goes. But then as I write, it can totally go off the rails, and it has already.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
I
So,
love it when
yeah.
it does. When it does
Yeah.
that, it's like your muse has taken control. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's the pantsers, like plotters and pantsers. Pantsers are by the seat of our pants. We don't have a lot of, organizing, murder walls, descriptions. We just kind of get a basic skeleton outline and just jump in. It usually takes, to me, I feel like we take longer to write. Maybe you don't, because you jump around, but with a plotter, they're already like, they're in control. They have the scene in their head, like it's all written out on a piece of paper and they just put it to, put it to their computer. And me, I'm like staring at the ceiling half the time going, okay, how do they do that? So it's just a different process. But I just know I'm much more of like emotion, like, like something on TV, like you said, a piece of music. I'll be like, I want that vibe. This time of year, this, like when you get fall and crisp, and I live close to the graveyard, I always want to write some like YA, like, gothic
Fantasy, yes.
fantasy. And I'm like, yes, it's just such a feeling.
The ones I'm writing now are also perfect for the feeling currently. And I was just thinking about that. I have this thriller psychological type one, and then I'm writing my Hades, and I just finished a demon one. So I'm like, it's literally like, these are the vibes. Like, I'm ready for fall.
Yeah. So it's really, again, every advice is again advice, and you need to take it in and then spit it back out if it doesn't work for you, and figure out, like, my always thing is ignore all the advice you're given, especially when it's like, because you just got to end up finding where it works for you. And most of the time it's none of this. It's going to be, abstract of a bunch of different things. And that's how, like, when you finally kind of get into your own and be like, okay, I'm going to stop trying to be this, author up here that I respect. And that's great, but I don't work that way, and it took me a while to be like, okay, you know what? This is how I work, good or bad, slow or fast. This is how I work, and so far it's working.
And that goes back to, like, I always say, when people ask what advice do you have, I always say, write for yourself, edit for the masses, market for the money. And like, it goes right back to that, write for yourself, and then handle everything else after.
Yeah. All right. So did we answer that at all?
Yes.
I think we did.
Okay.
You did.
I think we did a good job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yay.
Go team. Okay. Another reader asks, I would love to know how much research you do when you write a book.
Depends on the book. Go ahead, Will.
I typically
can't
do
wait
nothing.
to hear your answer.
I literally typically do no research at all. I have found that, like, a lot of my stories and everything, and then the environments, are from when I was younger. So typically I don't do research. However, the current one that I'm writing, my fantasy, fantasy, it's like a Greek mythology retelling of Hades and Persephone. And I want to do it in a way that's very respectful to the other deities, instead of like, like, oh, her mother's overbearing, kind of like Laura Olympus goes that route, where it's like, it's okay that she falls in love with him I want it to be difficult. I want it to be emotional. I want it to be like, all these other deities are here, and yes, they're all gray. So I'm doing a lot of research and reading a lot, but I also have magic in this one, like a lot of magic, and I'm loving it. And so my house is full of crystals right now. I just took a divination course. Not that I've always had crystals. I love them.
I was thinking, you always have crystals.
I literally, I always have crystals. I always have candles and all of that. But like, I'm like reading things and like researching different like spells and stuff. And I'm like, oh, what does that look like? What does that feel like? So I'm snagging up all those. And I just took a divination course in the UK, in this place. It's a store called Treadwell's, and I get my tarot readings there from a lovely lady named Michelle. She's wonderful. And they have different classes. And so I signed up for a divination course that was like, divination is like how to get guidance. It's very what?
Harry Potter.
Yes. So I had it in my calendar, and Sean wrote with Sydney something. Who is it? Who does it in Harry Potter?
Yeah.
I thought it was the name of the instructor,
the Grim.
because I didn't the Grim, that's tea leaf reading, isn't it?
Yeah.
When he sees the Grim. So this divination is like, tea leaf reading is a form of divination, but this was like smoke. What was the other one? Oil in water, and then smoke from lamps. And then there was another one. I already forgot. You can tell I'm not going to be using that one in the store, the third one. But I'm fine. It's very fun. It's very like I've never put so much work into research, but I think it's just because I want it to be very genuine and very respectful.
Do you use real towns in your contemporaries or anything like that?
No.
Or do you always make them? Okay.
If I do, they're different. You can actually tell if you're from the East Coast that a lot of the names of places that I use are from the 90s. They're no longer here anymore. But it's like the natural thing that I come up with is like Delaware and Pennsylvania places and roads. And I always do generic roads. I'll literally do like D Street or
Everyone has Maine.
Washington Ave,
Yeah.
like Main Streets. Like, yeah, I keep it as generic as possible because I also want the story to be timeless. And
Yeah.
I think that when you put in like people, like celebrity names or brands that exist now, in 10 years, you're going to have new readers who are like, I don't know what this is. And it's going to pull them out of the story. And I never want to pull a reader out. So I try to keep it as
Yeah, I
generic
was
as
reading a
possible.
book not too long ago that had something that was very, pop culture, and it was so out of
A
date, and
flip
it did take.
phone.
Yeah, well,
It was a
that
flip
too, but it was
phone.
like, no,
Mhm.
but there was like a celebrity they mentioned, and I'm like, oh
Oh,
God, like,
yeah.
I'm like, ooh, that's old, and it does take you out. It does not,
Mhm.
it doesn't last, I don't think.
Yeah.
So oh gosh, to me, I say know enough to fuck it up. But there's different varies of like, I will, especially like with mythology, I'll do enough research that I can twist it and turn it my own. But what I'm truly respectful of, because it drives me, it's one of my biggest pet peeves, especially in movies, is when you do use a real location and it doesn't make sense. Like how many times I've seen people driving on the PCH in LA, and all of a sudden they're like downtown. I'm like, dude, that would take 3 hours because of traffic, or it doesn't,
Yeah.
it just makes me crazy. And so I try respectfully, like I want, like, especially my Savage Land set in Budapest, I want everybody that lives in Budapest to read it and be like, oh yeah, that's actually there. Oh, I know that
Mhm.
building. They go there and it doesn't take them out because it's, it's real. Like that street, they're like, I'm standing on and I can see that, like, exactly what she's talking about. So I definitely do enough research. If I can't visit the place, like the Google Quest, the maps and stuff
Mhm.
like that, I drop that little figure in there so I can get the details. Um, and then, everything else, like I like to know enough and then, do my own twist on it. But, I try to do research. I definitely look at, like, right now, my whole thing of what my work in progress now is like runes and what they mean, and, symbols of like, and so, yeah, I definitely, I think you need to do your research, because I've read books that you can tell they don't. And it's fine if you want to do something that, like hockey or something, you don't really know hockey and you keep it general. Like it's just like kind of the like it's the sub story of the romance, that's fine. But if you're making it the first thing and you don't know anything about it, people that
Mhm.
know it are going to call you out. And it's
Mhm.
so, that to me is like, know what you're talking about, or keep
Yeah.
it something very general. Like
Exactly. Like
detail.
if you're right, like it's all fiction, but if you're writing a contemporary romance about a bartender, like the drink orders should taste good and make sense. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's
Like,
it's literally like if you've never ordered a drink before and you don't know and you decide to put like lemonade with Coke and triple sec with a shot of tequila or something. I don't know, that might taste good. I don't think so. But I feel like you got to do enough to where it's not going to take people out of it who are familiar with it.
yeah. Like me
Yeah.
as an ex bartender would be like, oh
That would taste crappy, right? Like I was just trying to make something up off the fly and be like, at least do enough to where it's not so obvious that you're not
Well,
an
I mean,
expert.
to me, it's more of like the mechanics of something. God, also the sun's coming in. The mechanics of something where, like if you're a server or if you're a bartender and they do something that you're like, no one as a server would ever do that,
Mhm.
or that's just not how it's done, So again, when you're creating a world, you want people to go in and not and like, fall into this world and not be jarred out or not want to come out. They want to be like wrapped up in this world and stay there, and if anything, again, this is just my personal pet peeve, again, that I get jarred out is when other authors bring in other authors. Like they'll be like, their character will be like, oh, and I'm reading a book by so and so, and I'm like, ooh, like immediately that I can
Because
hear
you're
the
pulled out.
author. Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
pulled out. Like I hear the author talking, like, like, oh, I love this book, so I'm going to mention it. And it's so jarring to me. So I want to go into a world that's fantasy, either if it's contemporary or not, and just
Stay
sink
there.
into that world and not come out, so
Yeah.
that's what I tried to strive for.
Speaking of ruins, I have some upstairs and I do ruins. Yeah.
Ooh, we'll have
I
to-
don't know how your girl is using them, but mine are like little tiles and I literally will drop them and ask for the ones that I want to come to me. And whatever
Yeah.
ones are closest to me are the ones that I read. I love it. Just throwing that out there as like a little
we'll
thing.
have to go over it.
Just,
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll have to go over it.
Okay, next question. How long does it take you typically to write a book from start to finish?
Well, that's definitely going to differ between us.
Yeah.
Forever.
I used to take only like 3 weeks max. I think I co-wrote a book in 10 days before, and that's the fastest. And then it started to become more like a month because I was doing a lot of world building and it was a lot of cliffhangers. So I had to utilize what was before and like I had to be more careful about things. And now it can take like 2 months, even if it's a standalone, just because I'm juggling so much and the kids are older and they require more time. And I can't just get lost in a book for 12 straight hours anymore. Like I have responsibilities that have to take me out of it. And also like my back and shoulders, I destroyed my body writing the way that I was writing.
Yeah.
This book though with Amelia, because it is only 17 chapters and it is co-written also. Like we're talking again, like 2 weeks. Like it's going to be her part's done. I'm going through it now. I'll be done by next week. So it's a fast one, but then I'm doing my Hades one. And I know that one's going to take me longer because it is a lot of world building and I have to be more careful. So yeah, it varies from weeks to months.
Mine's never weeks. Mine is always months, at least 4 to, depends on especially like how it's coming out of me. Like sometimes there are days that you're like, wow, I can't type fast enough. And then other days you're like, oh my God, this is like, it's like somebody's squeezing, trying to get a word out of you. And you're like, he said, she said, you're like, this is crap. So I think between being a pantser and also being in developing worlds that like either somehow are very much fantasy and have a lot of mythology and creatures and descriptions, and it takes me a lot longer. Like I used to, God, there was one day I still like I hit like $8,000 to $10,000 1,000 words in a day, and it was like the pinnacle. Like I've never, like, to me, it's around 2,000 to 3,000, like is my max now. And some days it's not even that. But like you said, life happens. Like I'm starting to get up at 5 a.m. so I can get some writing time before, I have to get Cooper up and worry about him. So it's just like, it is a long time for me, and people are like, oh, you write fast. I'm like, no, I don't. Like there's other people that like write 2 weeks and they're like, oh, another book out. You're like, oh God.
You are,
like,
that is still fast. And I also do 2,000 to 3,000 is a good day. 4,000 is a great day. 5,000 means I'm probably not going to write tomorrow. Like it like exhausts you. And then I don't even want to look at the computer the next day. So I try to stick with 2,000 to 3,000 also, which is like 1 to 2 chapters a day for me to spit out on first draft.
And I do. And are you like this? I kind of have to end on a chapter. I have to end on that like closure, like scene.
Oh yeah.
Mic drop. I can walk away. Otherwise, it will just get me. Like
and it's usually a sex scene.
It's not done.
If there's a sex scene coming up, if I could end on a sex scene, it's wonderful every time. And I've also noticed my ARC readers, like when they give feedback, a lot of times they also stop at the sex scene. So I'm like, I wonder if I blue bomb myself, and I'm like, or something,
Mine is not like the sex scene. It's the tension scenes between these two right now. Ooh, because they're true enemies. Like, so it's like, but I love when like I can almost like, I love ending all my chapters seem to almost be like little cliffhangers, because you want them to be like, oh, I want the next chapter, that one more chapter. No, I could do one more chapter, when they're reading. So I always end it like, I want them to want to continue on,
Same Z's.
Yeah.
Do we have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah,
do you think?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
Let's do it.
What's your advice when it comes to writing a series, duets, and trilogies?
Advice? Don't do it.
I don't go into it knowing it's going to be that. And I feel like for a lot of authors who I'm not going to name names or say anything for an example, but I feel like some readers might know. Sometimes you can tell that they planned on writing another book and it's a lot of words and it's not a lot of plots and it wasn't needed. Or like the one in the middle will be extra lengthy with some weird thing that really didn't need to be there. And it's like, oh, did you just want to make it 3? Like, so I never go on with, I'm going to make this X number of books and then force myself to make X number of books. My Merciless series, which is 4, I thought was going to be 1. So I go in and I just write what it is. And when you get to a point that feels like that in your head, your story, it feels like your series finale, that where there's going to be another season next time. Like I think that's the point where I'm like, okay, there's still so much to write. I'm going to do a cliffhanger here. And then I'll start the right one because it visually, physically, emotionally makes sense as opposed to I planned this. I hope this has the effect that I want it to have.
See, I think contemporary, I do the same. Like I go into it with one book in mind, and sometimes like, they'll be like, oh no, their friend needs now a story or something like that. But
well, that's also different. Those are
yeah,
standalones within a series, right? If it's a
yeah.
friend's book. So it's like
But
a
it
different,
goes off of theirs, yeah. Like, or
yeah.
I continue on with theirs. Like I did Shattered Love. I didn't expect book 2, but all of a sudden it was like people were like, is there gonna be more of them? More of them? And I'm like,
Mhm.
you know what? Actually, there could be.
Yeah.
So but my fantasy, most of the time, I know it's gonna be more than one book.
Mhm.
Not because I'm going, oh, I want to just write more. It's because I know the story is so, going to be so
Intricate.
twisted and have all this intricate. And I'm not somebody like I'm not going to speed through just so it can end on one book. Like I want you
Yeah.
guys again to feel like you want this world not to end.
Do you know how
So
many?
no,
See,
Savage
you
same,
Land,
same
Savage
with
Land, she
me.
originally said 3 books. It is now at
three.
8.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the same with me. I know my Hades and Persephone is going to be more than one because there's this obvious place in the movie in
Yeah.
my head and it's fantasy and there's a lot more that I want to write and other characters that I want to have love stories, but I don't know how many. And you could tell me with a gun to my head, if you don't tell me how many books this is going to be, I'm going to kill you. And I wouldn't be able to tell you how many books this is going to be.
Like I always have an idea. Like the one I'm working on now, I think it's going to be at about 3, but it could tell
Mhm.
me different when I'm writing it. It could be like, no, we're 2, or no, we're 5, Um,
Or 8.
right now, yeah, this one I plotted a little bit more because, it
Mhm.
was being written for somebody, so I was like, okay, I want a little more structure. Most I've ever structured. But it does feel like it will be a solid 3, but
Mhm.
that's probably the most I've ever known. Most of the time I'm like, yeah, like Savage Lands. And again, people like, I wasn't trying to stuff like, literally I was rereading, editing, and twice a single line, like I came across a single
Smart.
line and I was like, oh, that would be interesting. What if like, they were thrown back and what would happen? So yeah, it was never plotted that I was like, oh, I'm going to stretch this out because I want money. I hate when people are like, oh, you guys do this for money. Do you know how little we make?
Well,
This is not for money. And the
I
read
don't
through,
even think,
like,
I think sometimes authors just screw themselves too, announcing something as a trilogy, having all the pre-orders, and then they start writing it. And now it has to be what they said
yeah,
it was going
most
to
of the time
be.
that's somebody in a house that's
Yeah.
like, they'll come in the house, they'll be like,
Mhm.
no, you're
It's
doing 3
this.
books and so
Yeah.
yeah, with your self-published, you can do a lot more of
Mhm.
your own, like what it is.
So it sounds like in terms of like what one it's going to be, we're both saying like write it and see what happens. But what was the rest of the question? Was it about actually publishing it or just writing it?
Nope. It just said, what's your advice when it comes to writing a series, duets, and trilogies? So I think we kind of,
Don't go into it. My advice is go into like write for yourself, write for the stories, write for the character. Don't go into it thinking this is going to be a series, a trilogy, or duet.
Mhm.
They'll tell you,
Yes.
that's how
Yeah.
I go into it. That's my
Mhm.
advice.
I
Again, you
agree.
could throw that away.
Literally, you could throw it away. And some people do go into it business wise, and they're like, I know that my series makes more, so I'm going to make this into a series. And I sent all the love to
Just
them. Yeah.
though, like again, the people that the money thing, then people get really like, oh, you guys do cliffhangers for money.
yeah.
The longer you go, the less read through. So you're doing like I've written books that it was for me. I needed to, I would have been mad at myself if I ended the story the way I did because it was better to end it with 3 books. It was
Mhm.
like, no, they want to keep going and I'm gonna like I'm in this world.
Also,
So
the people that make
Right.
those statements aren't in this industry either. So they're just making an assumption probably because they didn't
Yeah.
like the second book or something, as opposed to actually having any kind of substantial no,
Well, what's so funny is like these same people will be watching a TV show that goes on and on and on with cliffhangers every episode and every season, and a couple that doesn't get together for years. So I'm like,
Which is,
wait,
and that's exactly how it is in our heads. It's just like I would
yeah,
say a TV show over a movie primarily.
probably, yeah. Like you said, yeah, because we do like chapters an episode, like to us. Like, so when we end it, that's like that that week episode ended, and you're like, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's probably more of a series, like a Netflix series kind of thing how we imagine it. So yeah.
Okay. Last one.
Okay.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Oh boy.
Let's
I'm
do
going to
it.
read the whole thing because I think it's really sweet too, how she phrased
Aw.
it. She said, "Hi, hello, huge fan. I have learned so much from this podcast as a baby author. I think a cool topic to hear y'all talk about would be a discussion on how do you say goodbye to your characters? When the story is done, do you end the character story as well for every character? Or are there characters that even after the story ends, they live rent free in your head and you think about continuing that specific character story?"
Fuck yeah. That's the reason why most of the series keeps going. Oh, saying goodbye. That's a tough one because we fall in love with our characters just as much as other people do. Like they will be, I mean, they're real to us. Like I will feel like Brexley and Warwick or, Eli and Ember, like I'll miss them, but sometimes you just know. And that's another thing I think you got to get comfortable with as an author is when it's time to say goodbye. Cause I hear all the time, like, oh, I'd love more of like Brexley and Warwick or something. And I'm like, their story's done. Like as of right now, again, they could shock me someday and be like, nope, we want to come back. But, like I wrap them up. And I like where I left them, and where I leave characters is all jagged. Like my bows, nobody, somebody's not going to be terribly happy at the end of my book. Somebody's probably going to be single, or somebody's going to be, like mourning a death. But, mostly the main characters, like the two main ones are going to be together, like, are going to have but that's how life is. We don't all we're all together happy at once. That's not how life is. So, but I do think I know when it's time to let go. Like it gets easier too. I think, the more you write, the more you're like, okay, I miss them. I love them, but I can't wait to start this other couple. And that's how Ash started and stuff like that. It's like, ooh, this character is now interesting. And, those two characters are interesting. I could see a story, how it could progress with these two, because after a while, I feel like my main ones, the story kind of dies after a while. It's going to be repetitive, like we've kind of hit that, like they're together. It's kind of, happy in a way, as much as I make my characters. And, I'm okay with.
Your characters are very happy and you have happily ever afters. Don't scare the listeners.
Not always.
Mine are traumatized happy. They're like, except all the death and blood around us. Yay! But I think it's something that you feel like, it's time to let go. And if if it nags at you and you're like, you can't let go of a story, then that means they're not done. You can continue on. But, and again, that was like Shattered Love, where I thought this couple's done. Okay, no, it's not.
Yeah.
So, I think that's how you just you let go. They'll always be your baby.
I'm similar for some of them, but I'm also a little weirdo, as we know. And I leave the door open for fanfic versions of my characters, but in different genres. So, like my Merciless World, I have a whole story plot in my head where it's a mafia, modern day mafia, even though Alexa doesn't exist in my books because mafia would be screwed with that. But the women all basically go, they're like celebrating. So it's like an epilogue in my head, right? And I'm fantasizing about this epilogue. One of them's getting married now, and they go to a tarot reading, and they're all holding hands. And the main girl, Arya, is the heroine in All He'll Ever Be, right? She doesn't have her hands in it because she's too busy. And they do this like little incantation. And as she's leaving, I have chills now, but as she's leaving, the woman apologizes to her. And she's like, I don't, like, she doesn't know why or whatever. They all go to sleep and they wake up in a completely different world. It's like fantasy with werewolves, but she's completely alone. And so they're almost like starting off all of their stories all over again, but in a different world, but with similar tropes and similar feelings. So I'm able to create like an alternative reality where they would fall in love again, but yeah, in a different world. But so she remembers, but nobody else does. But yeah, so and if I ever write that, I would just remove that first chunk. But here now I have an entirely different story that has the same feelings and of the similar characters. Obviously they would be different, but yeah, so I'm like a little that's how I keep them alive in my head and feel better about saying saying goodbye, because I'm like, not really, I'll dream about you.
Yeah. And I revisit, like, I mean, I totally will reread my books if I miss somebody, because I'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, I miss, like, especially my contemporary, because they are, a lot of them are standalone. And I'll be like, I miss that couple. But yeah, no, I think it's something that, like, it took me a while to really let go of my first couple in my book. I think I was so invested in them, and it was such a part of me. And not that the rest of them aren't, but I think you just acknowledge when deep down, you're like, yeah, your story's over, like, you're living, a lot of them, because my world is all connected. A lot of times we'll see them again. But again, to make them the main character again, I'm like, no, I'm happy with, and I think that's like that satisfied. I'm happy with where I left them, and they're doing good, so
Yeah.
it's that. So I find it easier to let go, not, maybe the world. So I'll find different, like you, maybe not characters, but I mean, I'll find different characters to stay in that world. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's,
Oh, now I have all the good
now
feels
you just kill them kill them all off. Fuck them all.
That's more like it.
Right.
when you're
Come on.
PMSing, everybody dies.
Die.
I was co-writing with Lauren once. I forget what book we were writing. And I think it was Mr. CEO. I think it was definitely Mr. CEO. And I'm like writing and whatever. And she popped into the doc and was like, hey, like as I'm writing, right? So I stopped writing. And then I go to the DMs on Facebook and I'm like, hey, like what's up? What's going on? Everything okay? And she's like, you feeling okay? Because he's being a real asshole right now. And I don't know that you're going to like this on a read through. And I went through and I was like, oh, yeah, okay. I'm just going to like chill and I'll come back to this later. So sometimes my anger does come through.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
and it is a fine line of when you're pushing the cocky, like, because I
Yeah.
like the strong, cocky guys, and I'm like, right now, I'm walking a line of like, whew, how abusive and toxic is he?
No, I was literally not, she knew I was also going through some things. So I think that she was like, I think she's just in her feels right now and she needs to
Yeah.
get the hell away from this document.
She's gonna kill everybody. You die and you die, and I'm
It's
gonna
like an
gut you.
office romance and everybody's
Yeah.
dying. Like,
God, okay. Now I'm like, now I need to write that.
right? Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
that was a
So
good one. Yeah.
yeah,
For anybody listening, hit us with those questions down below.
this might have
Remember,
spurred more, hopefully, so we
I
can
know,
keep
right?
on. Yeah.
Yes, we did a lot of like writing questions, but I think like we could also do business questions.
Mhm.
I love talking business.
Yeah, she's the one that talks to you. I'm just here.
All
One
day.
of our-
Blah, blah, blah.
One of our listeners did say something about that you guys should do some kind of a course in business and marketing and
Ooh.
writing. Just
That sounds
saying.
like fun.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Business course. That sounds like fun. No, no one said that ever.
Okay,
That's what I
well,
hire people for.
that's true. That is true. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.